I don't see any more people in the waiting room. I hope everyone's doing well tonight. My name is Hannah. I am the outreach coordinator at NAMI North Texas. I also coordinate Ending the Silence. Okay, I'm gonna actually make. Give me just a second. Okay. Sorry guys, technical difficulties. All right. So like I was saying, my name is Hannah. I'm the outreach coordinator here at NAMI North Texas and the Ending the Silence coordinator. I'm on here to help navigate any questions and to help to relay those to our presenters. So I'm going to introduce our panel in just a moment, but before that, we are NAMI North Texas. For those of you who don't know, we're the National Alliance on Mental Illness. We're the largest grassroots organization dedicated to bettering the lives of millions of Americans who are living with a mental health condition. And we have tons of things at NAMI. We have free support groups, we have free classes, we advocate at the legislative level, and then we have things like this, our virtual programming, and some of the other presentations that we bring out into the community. This is our wrap-up webinar. It's Minority Mental Health Month. I did not name it. I call it Multicultural Mental Health Month. You can call it what you like, but the point is that we're talking about something that's not very often talked about. And today we're wrapping up the month as we're coming close to July. Because we want to introduce ourselves and also tell you how we identify, I will let you know that I am biracial, I am Hispanic and Caucasian. I call myself Rocky Road Ice Cream. And I'm going to pass it on to Omar. Omar, if you'll introduce yourself. Omar is one of our panelists and he'll be speaking after our presentation.
Thank you, Hannah. My name is Omar. I'm from South Texas and I identify as Hispanic and LGBT. I'm a new volunteer with NAMI and I'm really excited to be here and talk with you guys.
Thanks, Omar. We're excited to hear your perspective soon. Lauren, will you go next and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Hey guys, my name is Lauren. Thank you so much for joining. I'm so excited to chat with you guys. I identify as African American. I am from North Carolina, but I'm in North Texas. And as a volunteer for NAMI, I go to different speaking engagements. I am an Ending the Silence lead presenter for youth. And again, excited to be here, guys.
Thanks so much, Lauren. Aryela, if you'll tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thank you, Hannah. I'm Aryela. I identify as African American. From Dallas, been here my whole life. I am also an Ending the Silence presenter, and I'm also excited to chat with you guys.
We're really excited to hear all of y'all's perspective, but we're gonna first start with Zoe. Zoe, if you'll introduce yourself, and then she's gonna jump right into some information about what this wrap-up webinar is.
Thanks, Hannah. Hi guys, my name is Zoe. I am an intern this summer with NAMI North Texas. I am going to be a junior at the University of Texas at Austin, majoring in biochemistry in the fall. Even though I go to school in Austin, I grew up here in North Texas in Plano, and I identify with the Asian American community. And so I'm really glad you could all join us here today for our wrap-up webinar. I'm going to give you guys some facts just so that we are all on the same page about why Minority Mental Health Month or Multicultural Health Month is important. So the reason why we are able to have July as Multicultural Mental Health Month is because of this woman right here, Bibi Moore. She was a huge advocate for minority mental health and even played a role in establishing NAMI Los Angeles. And in recognition of her efforts, in 2008, U.S. House of Representatives proclaimed July as National Minority Mental Health Awareness Month. So the reason why we have this month is summed up pretty well by this quote of hers, which is that stigma is one of the main reasons why people with mental health don't seek treatment or take their medication. And so some of you might know, some of you may not, but stigma is a very important factor when it comes to whether people are able to seek treatment or not. And this issue affects all communities, but it also has a disproportionately large impact on minority mental health. And so the whole point of this month is to bring awareness to this issue. So what are some of the things that we have been doing here at NAMI for this month? We've had several goals throughout this month, one of which is to inform and educate. We've put on a bunch of infographics on our social media sites in an attempt to tell our community, hey, these are some of the facts that affect our different multicultural communities in our area. So if you can take a look here and some of the things you've seen, maybe put in the chat, what on this page surprises you the most? Something that you may have not heard of or something that you didn't know before you came to see this. In addition to that, we've also been looking to engage and share with our community. We've done that through our webinars, one of which you are all in here today to hear these stories, or we've actually started a blog in which we've asked members in our community to come out and share their story in an attempt to start the discussion that we need to start around minority mental health and talk about it with each other so that other people feel encouraged to share their stories as well. And so now that Minority Mental Health Month is over, it doesn't mean we're stopping this initiative. We're continuing this blog as Share Your Story NTX. And if you would like to go see these stories or maybe even share your story of your own, you can access it through the NAMINorthTexas.org website. So again, why is Multicultural Mental Health Month so important? Well, as you can see, as time goes on, by the time we reach 2045, the United States is going to become increasingly diverse, which means that more and more people will have an equal say in our country. However, even as we continue this trend, access to mental health care is not equivalent. There's an importance in this fact that if you can look at the graph to the right of the screen, amongst the people receiving mental health services, people of color are still least likely to seek these services. And that has had very real effects on these communities. You see, depression in African American and Latinx communities is more likely to be persistent. Then if you look at the American Indians and Alaska Native community, they report higher rates of PTSD and alcohol dependence than any other group. When we're talking about access to mental care, Asian American adults are the least likely of any racial and ethnic group to seek treatment. And finally, also as a part of our Multicultural Mental Health Month, we discuss LGBTQ individuals, and unfortunately, they are twice as likely to have a mental health disorder. So based off these statistics and these facts, you can see that it's very important that minority mental health is talked about because it is something that still affects our community today. Finally, amongst all the communities that we've talked about, there are several barriers of care that are specific to each community and will come up in our discussion. However, we can find some commonality in between everyone through some common barriers of care. For example, stigma is often greater among minority populations. This is a big factor of what prevents people from seeking help in the first place. If you're unable to talk to your friends or your family about what you're facing, what's the likelihood that you're gonna go talk to a stranger about how you feel? And even when people go out and look for the help that they need, there is often a lack of diversity and cultural competency among healthcare providers. We talked more about this in our last webinar, but we did discuss that sometimes it's easier to talk to someone who quote unquote looks like you. So when you feel like you can relate to the person in front of you, you can talk to them better, that's what really helps people with mental illnesses open up. And since we have a lack of that amongst our mental health care providers, it's even harder for people of multiple cultures to reach out and get help. In addition to that, language barriers can play a very large role in serving as a barrier to care. If you are having trouble speaking about your feelings, other people will have trouble understanding. And when you reach that kind of struggle between not being able to express what you really mean, that can be really difficult to overcome. Finally, one of the largest barriers to care is the financial reality that there's inadequate support for mental health services. As of 2018, people of color were still less likely than the Caucasian population to have insurance. And because of that, it becomes much harder to get support for the mental health services that you need. And so as you can see here, there are many common barriers to care, and that's what we're here to discuss. We're here to start a conversation around these topics so that hopefully you leave this webinar more informed and with a greater idea of how can I help my community and how can I help people get the treatment that they need. Thank you.
Thanks, Zoe. You can stop sharing your screen so we can see everyone. Perfect. Great. So feel free, I don't know if anyone saw that, but feel free to drop any questions on the side in the chat box. One of the first ones that we received from Debbie: what are some issues minorities face when they try to get help with their mental health conditions? Are you all comfortable sharing your own experiences? And I'm going to go ahead and just, y'all chime in when you want. Lauren, Omar, Aryela, Zoe, and whoever would like to go first.
And can you repeat the question again? Was it what are some issues minorities face when they try to get help for their mental health conditions? Okay. So hi everyone again, I'm Omar. So speaking to my experiences being Hispanic, being in the LGBT community, some of the experiences that I've had, especially growing down in South Texas, where there's a high rate of poverty, low rates of literacy, I feel like a lot of people don't have the role models where they can feel they see someone similar to them going out and get that help. So I feel like lack of role models is one condition where you feel not enabled to go get some help. But in addition to that, the fact that some people or a lot of people in this community either speak mostly Spanish or maybe they only speak broken English, that language barrier can really affect their ability to get good care, especially if they go to get some help and they feel like they're not really connecting to their provider or they're not feeling understood. I feel like that can really affect their well-being and their improvement.
Yeah, I'm gonna roll another question into that. We're just talking in general, what are some barriers to care that minorities face, but what are some barriers to care that you all have personally faced or have seen?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so building off what Omar said, I think for me, especially in the Asian American community, stigma is a very large barrier that we face. In our community, there's often a saying, which is, not my kid, not my problem. So while other children may have mental health, every Asian parent thinks, well, as long as it's not my child, it doesn't matter to me. And that really creates a kind of culture where it's hard to talk about these issues because you're faced with your parent who says, I don't want my child to have a mental health illness. It becomes so much harder to speak up to them, like, hey mom, like I have these emotions or I have these feelings. So in my community, that's one of the biggest barriers to holding people back. And another thing that I think is something interesting is that there's the model minority myth, which is that people in Asian American communities are wealthy, they're well off. And that's another factor that makes it hard to speak up because people will say, well, you have the wealth, you have the education, what do you have to be sad or depressed about? And that the reality is mental health illnesses can affect anyone regardless of socioeconomic status. And having that kind of stigma against it, that you should not have any reason to be sad, is something that makes a lot of people think, wow, this is something that's probably in my head. I don't need to get treatment for it. I'll get over it. And that leads to the issue being suppressed even more.
And Hannah, I think for me, this is Lauren, guys. I think for me, one of the biggest issues that I faced in terms of getting help was the fact that I grew up in a very religious environment, a religious community. And so that kind of is a common theme throughout African-American culture. Is this religion piece. And so for me, when I spoke up and tried to tell people how I was feeling, there was this kind of sentiment of just pray about it, it'll go away. The devil is trying to get you today. He's trying to take away your blessing. And there wasn't really this focus on, well, wait a minute, something's going on with the person. It was more of a spiritual matter. And so it was very difficult for me to get past that in order to get some help.
All right, this is Aryela. Something that I've experienced is kind of, there are so few African American women in psychiatry, so that's kind of a barrier I faced, you know, where it's kind of harder to connect with others. And then just at least the waiting period. Like I remember one time I was trying to find a psychiatrist. It was like a 2-week waiting period before I could get into an appointment. And it's like, you know, I don't need the help in 2 weeks, you know, like I need the help right away. So that's kind of something I faced.
And Omar, you and I had talked about language a lot, that being a barrier to care. Do you mind commenting on that a bit more, as far as how language can really affect the ability to find treatment?
Absolutely. So, you know, different groups have different barriers. And I think that, again, something that people from Hispanic communities or people coming from Latin American countries and getting their care here, they're coming in maybe with broken English, they're coming in with poor English, and maybe that's affecting their ability to feel understood. And so it's really important when trying to get help that you feel like you're connecting to the person, like Aryela was saying. And it's so hard to do that if you're encountering such a struggle to meet someone who speaks the same language as you.
Yeah. The second part of the first question was, do you all feel comfortable sharing your own experiences? But I feel like that was kind of already answered. Here's a question, and it's long, so listen. Do you all feel like saying that, quote, mental health doesn't discriminate, or, quote, mental health can be a problem for anyone, color doesn't matter, takes away from acknowledging that there are real barriers to care, access, quality of care, and cultural biases, lack of cultural competency that prevent BIPOC from seeking and finding treatment? So people of color, do these kinds of sayings seem like an all lives matter response to advocating for mental health awareness in the BIPOC communities? Do I need to read that again?
I can start off with that, I think. So it sounds like the question is, would people say, you know, everyone faces mental health issues. You know, you're not necessarily maybe special because you're in this minority group. Everyone has these problems. So I think that what you mentioned in your second sentence, I think about it taking away from that experience is true. So again, for example, speaking to the language experience that I've had, if we say, you know, everyone's got mental health problems, every group can encounter them, that's totally true. They can, and they do, but not everyone encounters that barrier where they can't communicate to the people that they're trying to get help from. And so we all face those problems, but I think you're right in that we're not given the same resources to overcome those challenges we face in our life.
And I think to add on to what Omar is saying, I think it definitely depends on the context of you know, someone saying that, what the situation is. I think just in general, across the board, you know, saying something like all lives matter. Well, yes, all lives matter, but what is the next step that you're going to take after that? So it's kind of one of those things where I think of, you know, when you're trying to explain to maybe a friend or a coworker, like, gosh, I'm just having a bad day. And they're just like, oh, I have bad days too. Right. I think it's one of those things where it does take away from that person's experience. So I do agree with Omar. And I think it's important. I think part of the issue in sometimes not being able to maybe agree with someone or say, yes, people of color, minorities, multicultural folks do have more of an issue getting mental health assistance. I think part of the reason why it may be difficult for people is because of our own shame. And I can speak about this just kind of within the context of just how I grew up. And, you know, saying something like, Gosh, I'm sorry, guys. I'm like, there's so many things going on in my head right now, but I'll just say it like, like this to kind of throttle back. I think just in general, it depends on the context of what the person is saying and the situation. But I do think ultimately it's very difficult for people to acknowledge the issues that we do have, especially when they're not your issues. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I agree with everything Lauren and Omar has said. So one way that this has been explained to me, and I feel like is a very accurate way of explaining it, or at least a very simplified way of explaining it so that everyone can understand, is by using the burning house analogy. So people have said, for example, like if a house is on fire and everyone's rushing to save it, you're grabbing your buckets of water, you're calling your friends, things like that. And then your neighbor says, well, what about my house? And you reply, well, your house is not on fire. And then people are there saying, but my house matters too. And the response is, yes, your house matters, but your house is not the one on fire right now. And so that to me, it kind of shows that discussion in that, for example, like if all our cultures have our houses and some of them are on fire a little more than others, or all of them are on fire, it's not that we don't care about your house in general. If your house was on fire, we would care about it too. But in this case, there are very real dangers and very real needs in the other communities right now that we have to address and talk about before we can be equivalent and starting with all of our houses are not on fire. And so that's what I think when it comes to this, when people say all lives matter, or like it doesn't matter, mental health affects everyone, that's true. But when your house is a little more on fire than others, you deserve the extra support of like a few more firemen and of more discussion than others. And that's why it's important for us to have these discussions so that we can increase cultural competency, increase awareness in our multicultural communities, so that we can all start out from an equivalent playing field.
Thanks, Zoe. I want to encourage everyone who, I know some people showed up a little late. If you have questions, please feel free to put them in the comment box. I had someone privately message me to ask a question, and you feel free you can do that as well. The question is, we talk a lot about lack of diversity among mental health providers. Personally, what do you think healthcare providers can do to be more culturally competent to people of different backgrounds?
Can I kind of jump out for a minute and say a couple things?
Sure.
Okay, so my name is Saccarello, and I run an organization called the Well Community. Some of you may or may not be familiar with the Well Community. We're located in North Oak Cliff, and we've been around for 18 years, helping adults who have severe and persistent mental illness, and also we call our clients members, and many of them live in poverty. Most all of them live in poverty, and many of them have other health conditions as well. So what I want to say is that when the marches started, about a month ago, I decided that it was incumbent upon me to understand more about race relations and what has happened throughout history. And so as a white woman who grew up in a family that was not racist, I thought I understood quite a bit, but I can tell you that what I learned real fast is that I don't really understand. Mm-hmm. I do understand more now because I've taken the time to read. The last book I read was White Fragility. I've watched documentaries. I've listened to podcasts and talks, and I've learned a lot. So what I want to say is one of the basic issues that we have when it comes to someone saying, but my house is on fire too, if they're a white person, they don't really understand that the house on fire is the most important one.
Right.
And so one of the things that I'll be looking at is because right now, while we are still serving our members, we're doing it remotely.
Mm-hmm.
And for our members, the most important thing we can do right now is providing them food and hygiene products, and you have to do remote case management by phone. And but as we begin to come back together is to make sure that my organization is an organization that's not discriminating, and to figure out if we are, where are we and how can we change that?
Yeah.
And
I
so,
think, Alice, one of the things that you're saying, you know, wanting to make sure this question right here that is talking about diversity amongst mental health providers is really important to that as well.
Can I say something?
exactly.
Yeah, I really want to get back to the questions. Let's wait until the very end. I'm going to leave let me give you all about 15 minutes so we can all pop in, but I want to make sure our panelists have a chance to answer some of these questions, and then let's kind of sidebar and come back to this topic if y'all don't mind. So back to what we were originally talking about, what can healthcare providers do to be more culturally competent? What are some of those things that y'all are thinking? Zoe, Omar?
Yeah, sorry, I didn't know whether you were going to talk about the other panelists. I think one of the biggest things when it comes to cultural competency in physicians is one, awareness. Because a lot of times, like Miss Alice said, we come in thinking, oh, we didn't grow up in a racist family, we're not racist. And that's actually, I feel like, one of the most dangerous things to think, because then you're giving yourself an ignorance bias that, or an optimism bias that can often harm you in multiple ways. So being aware that, okay, yes, maybe I didn't grow up in a family that's racist or things like that, that's really just the bare minimum. It's to be aware that other cultures that are not the same as your own face different experiences, but different historical experience, different current experiences, and to enter any kind of clinical setting with the mindset of, I don't know exactly what they're experiencing, so it's up to me to get that information. Kind of like an investigation. If you are to be a detective, you don't make conclusions until you hear all the facts. And so I think that type of awareness is very important to emphasize in our current medical education, as well as the education of anyone who is looking to work with diverse groups in that kind of way, so that people will know when they go in that do not hold any biases, even if they are good, quote unquote, good towards yourself, because unless you are the person themselves, you don't know what they're experiencing or what their cultural experiences are.
Yeah, and I think adding on to that too, I think in order to understand sort of the way people behave and their culture, you've got to immerse yourself a little bit in that culture too. It'll be hard for you to understand the tendencies of people, their problems, if you've never been exposed to those problems yourselves. For example, in Hispanic culture, there's this big idea called machismo, which is like masculinity. And it's this idea that people are strong, people don't break. And, that can really be a barrier to seeking mental health care when you think that you have to be strong all the time. There's a strong idea that men are in charge, all of that. And if you've never been surrounded by that idea, it'll be hard for you to understand if you've never interacted with someone who's experienced that too. So I think getting out into the community, meeting patients from diverse backgrounds, getting to make friends with those kinds of people, I think that'll be really helpful to gain some more information.
Building a little bit off what Omar said, I definitely agree. Just definitely immersing yourself and just kind of, I don't feel like you truly need to like understand, but at least being like at least aware of other, cultures, as well as I think in Texas, at least, I think physicians should know Spanish, at least up here in the Dallas area, just because it is so diverse and there are a lot of Spanish speakers. And that is like a big barrier within really just like the health community at all. So
I think from a I'll say a patient standpoint, I think it's important for us to make sure our physicians are held accountable for the work that they do. So what I mean by that is when you go in for that first visit, let's just say a psychiatrist in this example, you go in for that first visit to have a chat about how you're feeling. I think it's important for, me to say, hey, I am African American. I identify as female. And here's kind of a list of things that I've dealt with that have truly impacted my mental health. Are you comfortable talking about those? Do you feel that you're able to help me through from a cultural standpoint? And I think it's important to have that conversation. And if it's not, unfortunately, I know you can't necessarily jump around as often as maybe we want to, or, get a new psychiatrist within 24 hours. But I think it's so important for us to ask those questions and then to say, I appreciate you, but I think I need somebody else who can really kind of sit down and really understand where I'm coming from culturally, and to, have that kind of conversation.
And just looking at some of the comments, going back to what y'all were talking about, Zoe's conversation or example of the house on fire. Melissa Sutterberg says, I'm not sure that a lot of white people truly understand what it means to have their house on fire. Just observing it via media can't possibly equate to living it. And Alice says, Melissa, I agree. And so that conversation is still happening. And I promise, guys, I'm going to give you all some time to chat. So we do want to hear, I want to hear from Melissa Morgan and Alice again a little bit more after this, but I want to make sure that I'm getting these questions that that are coming to me privately as well. So what are some things, projects that you all would like to do or see that will help advocate about mental health awareness in addition to your work with NAMI?
For me personally, as I mentioned before, I am an intern with NAMI North Texas, and I came into NAMI with the idea of hoping to increase awareness about mental health in the Asian American community specifically, because I grew up here in North Texas. I grew up in Plano, which is very Asian American community heavy environment. And so one of the projects that I would hope to do in the future, or hope to help contribute, is to help push into the Plano schools with our Ending the Silence program, which talks a lot about stigma and how to recognize mental illnesses in your friends, in your community, and your peers. And the reason for that is because I still believe that there is a huge stigma in the Asian American community, especially my community. If I'll share a bit of my experiences, in that one of my friends that I knew, she unfortunately committed suicide in her senior year of high school. And even though that event happened and people attended the funeral and things like that, I still hear even to this day that the parent of the girl who's involved still don't really believe in mental health treatment for their other daughter, who is a bit older but is facing very similar issues and even worse after the passing of her sister. And that's why I feel like it's so important for me to at least push into the schools to start the conversation amongst the youth, so that they know how to reach out to their peers and their friends when they need it, before moving on to the older community and letting them know mental illness is not something to be ashamed of. It does not diminish the work that you put into raising your child. It does not diminish any of your efforts or you have done. Sometimes, like I said, mental illness can strike anyone, regardless of what type of experiences you learned. And by accepting that and then helping to get over the barrier of care of stigma, that's something that I want to do for my community especially.
Does anyone have anything to add to that as far as projects that you would like to do and see that will help advocate about mental health awareness in addition to your work with NAMI?
I think, I know this is already happening, but I think I would love to see it more. But I kind of explained how religion played such a huge role in me not getting the help that I really needed. And I would love to see the faith community be more open to discussing mental health, and to have people go in and be on a panel, to have more churches really be actively involved in that way, to really take mental health seriously for what it is. Understanding that, you know, you still may have certain other beliefs, but it doesn't mean that you can't also understand that mental health is a physical, mental illness is a physical issue, you know, as well.
I want to direct this question to Omar. Omar, in the LGBTQ plus community, how can we kind of break down some of those barriers to access, I mean, barriers to care? What are some things that you're seeing in that community?
Yeah, so similar to what we talked about earlier, every community and every group is different. So for example, a large amount of the LGBTQ community face, they get kicked out of their homes when they come out to their families. And of course, that's extremely devastating if you're in high school or younger, to feel like your parents don't support you, to feel like you're all alone in the world, to have to go to a shelter. So that has extremely devastating effects on mental health. So I think that understand that, again, every group is different. And if you notice someone who's in the LGBTQ community who's going through a difficult time, understand the gravity of that situation, because they could be homeless, and maybe that they don't have role models. For example, in my experience, there weren't a lot of LGBTQ community role models around me. So understand that they might feel really alone. And so the best thing I think in that situation is to be a helpful person, to be a friend to that person, and listen to them and connect them to the resources that they can, especially since the resources that they might need on top of mental health care might be necessities like food and shelter.
Thank you. Someone's wanting to know, have you all been able to establish support systems in coping with your various mental health conditions? So establish support systems.
So this is
Oh no, go ahead, Lauren. I just want.
So this is Lauren, guys. So I think I have been able to establish a fairly consistent support group. I think it's kind of changed over the past 2 years. I was diagnosed 2 years ago, but I had lived with mental health, pretty serious mental health condition for about 20 years. So I think it changes for me. It's changed over time. But what I've had to do as I've gotten healthier and just more confident in who I am and accepting my situation is, if someone isn't maybe necessarily should be a part of my support team, to no longer include them in that, because not everybody that is close to you is necessarily in a position to help you. I think for me, what's been incredibly helpful is the NAMI peer-to-peer support group that I attend weekly. So other people with lived experience has been just kind of amazing to be in a situation or to be in a group where everybody understands what you're talking about. And so for me, that's been a big part of me developing a support group.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was gonna say a lot of what Lauren said too, especially the part about that some people aren't ready or aren't suited to be part of your support group. For me personally, I know I've had to cut off certain people from my lives completely sometimes because they just weren't good for me and my mental health. And I think the first step to establishing a support group is realizing that, yes, you can do that. You're not being harsh or mean or anything like that. In the end, what matters is you come first. That was something my therapist used to say to me a lot, is that you're going to be the only person that's going to follow you through your life. And so if that means cutting off the people who are hurtful to you, then so be it. And so another part that has really helped me in establishing the support group is talking and starting the discussion with people that is hard to discussion with. I've been very fortunate to have a very supportive family after I was diagnosed with my mental illness, but I also know that what happened wouldn't have happened if I wasn't able to start talking that, yes, I do have a mental health illness, and yes, it has to be taken seriously. And so that's how I've been talking to my peers also in the community. We've established a kind of support group amongst ourselves, the younger generation, just because we understand the older generation might not be as supportive. And so having that kind of open discussion and everyone involved realizing that we're all here for each other has been a big part of me keeping my support group alive.
Kind of building off what Zoe said, you know, I was also lucky to have a supportive family as well, a great therapist, but I think also, you know, it is important to cut off people who aren't good for your mental health. Like I've definitely done that quite a bit this year. And then as well as just making sure that like you can be open. Like I've connected with friends that like had I not brought up my mental illness, you know, like now I wouldn't have them in my support group because now I know that they're there for me and I can call them if something's going on. So I think that's definitely important.
Thanks, guys. Dr. Morgan, I know you wanted to say something, and so I wanted to make sure to come back to you. Can you share with us what you wanted to say?
Yeah, a couple of things. So I teach mental health. I've taught it for years. Right now I'm teaching an occupational therapy assistant program at Parker. And I'm proud to say we are a very diverse program. Our program director is African-American. Out of 5 of us, 2 people are African-American on the faculty, and our students are very diverse from all backgrounds. And when I teach mental health, we have this conversation all the time. And in fact, Omar, it broke my heart because I had a student from Nigeria and she said, we don't have homosexuals. And I said, you don't? And she said, no, we don't have them. They kill them. And I was like, what? And I said, and she said, no, we just don't have them. And so I don't like to talk about it. And if my son were homosexual, I think we wouldn't talk to, I mean, this was a student who in other ways was just terrific, but just, I had to understand where she was coming from. She's coming from that culture or that country and where they kill people. You talked about, you know, being Hispanic and we did have an Hispanic male who came out at Parker because he felt safe. And he said the same thing, his family cut him off. And luckily he had really good friends. But I think the problem with us is we were very active in mental health. In fact, when I started OT back in the 70s, I'm pretty old, we were in every mental health setting, large psych hospitals, community mental health, and they started not reimbursing occupational therapists in mental health that much. And so with my students, they're all like, oh yes, I want to go into mental health. I want to serve my community. I want to be the role model. You know, I understand, and what you said about religion, we have an African-American student who said her family's so religious, it's like, I want to go and educate my family about mental health, but then our salaries are half of what we could make, and they're not reimbursing us. We have bills in Congress to reimburse mental health for OT. So we have the interest, we have the desire, but it's blocked. We're not allowed in. And you know, if you can make, with a 2-year degree, if you can make $65,000 a year working in a nursing home, and you're only going to make 25 or 30 working in mental health, what are you going to choose? So I think with my students, I just push advocacy all the time. You know, get on the phone to Ted Cruz, get on the phone to Governor Abbott, whoever it takes, your senators, because these bills are just stalled. But I am proud of my university because so we've had like 3 or 4 young people come out as gay, and many of them were Hispanic. And, you know, they just said, and I said, wow, you're 25 and this is the first time you're coming out. I'm from New York City, so I'm not used to that. Like everybody's everything there, you know. So I just wanted to make that point and see what you guys thought, like how can we get our profession to be recognized? Plus psychiatrists are probably the least paid of the physicians.
So what I'm hearing is how do you get your profession? Are you talking about OTs, or are you talking about just anyone in the mental health realm to be more recognized?
Well, probably, you know, I have friends who are social workers and they just don't make their master's level degrees, and they're like, we're not making even what a teacher makes.
Yeah.
And so, you know, sure, psychiatrists do pretty well, but our minority students who go into OT, who are the first generation to graduate college, they love mental health. I mean, they'll say, oh, everything's mental health and I really want to work in mental health. But if we're blocked, I don't know who's out there. You know, the bills are saying that OT is going to be a part of the conversation, part of the mental health, but nobody's hiring us and nobody's reimbursing us.
I think that advocacy is key here. And, you know, unfortunately here in Texas, I think you and I just talked about this during your class, actually.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if you remember, but I got an opportunity to go and meet Dr. Morgan's class. And here in Texas, we're what, 50th in the nation for mental health funding? And yes, and it's just devastating. And so, you know, boots on the ground advocacy is what is important. And I'll tell you, 51, including the District of Columbia, Debbie says. Someone said great insight, Melissa, by the way. I just wanted to make sure you saw that comment. Great insight. And yeah, I think so. And I think that it's just making sure that we get that information, those bills that we want, into legislation. We get that advocacy. We get people who are aware that we as a community, we as NAMI NTX Texas, go down and we advocate at the legislative level. And if you want that to be a part of the conversation, then we ask that you come in and do that with us, so that we can get those really important things like that, because you're so right. And when you and I were talking in your class, one of the things that I brought up was that my daughter's OT works just as hard and on the same things as play therapy, and they work together. And so I don't know if that really answered much, but I think advocacy at the legislative level is key.
We're very involved in children, like children with autism and children with problems and children with mental health issues, because we're in the schools. But at 18 or 22, if they're in special ed, it stops. And especially for our low income and minority students, they get free OT, and then at 22, bang, you're done.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I mean, I see all of that, and I agree with that. And I'm just thinking of my own child's journey as I'm trying to formulate a response. And it's also a barrier to care, because y'all are not getting paid enough. We're not getting people out there who want, you know, just like you were saying. Ebony said, I agree, Dr. Morgan, about advocating for higher wages and helping professions like mental health for future, you know, she's a future, oh yeah, you're a future social worker, sorry. I'm trying to translate. Does anyone have anything else to add to that, to those thoughts? I don't know if anyone else on the panel is seeking jobs in that field as well.
It's a good field.
I did have maybe one or two other thoughts sort of touching on what you mentioned, Dr. Morgan. So one is that there were some other challenges I thought of as you were mentioning your story about your student from Nigeria regarding the experience that the LGBTQ community has, in that this community can be considered a sort of hidden community, or what makes us different culturally can be considered hidden, because I mean, there might not be any sort of physical manifestation that indicates that we are anything in the LGBTQ spectrum. So that can be really hard because that can make people feel unseen. That can make people that can make men, for example, feel like they have the expectation that they have to be this manly man, this masculine person that has these expectations for loving hunting and sports and all of that. And that might not be the case. And then there's also maybe the reverse of that, where once they've been labeled or identified as a member of that community, maybe the men feel like everyone expects them to be a certain kind of way or like act like a gay person, and that also might not be who they are. So it's this group has its own challenges because of the hidden factor of their culture that makes who they are. So that was one thing that came to mind, and another was that how you were touching on how this field has so little funding. Another concern, speaking from the Hispanic perspective, especially someone who came from a place with high poverty rates, is that a lot of times our parents push on us that we've got to have high earning degrees, we've got to make money, you've got to support the family because your family can't make it on their own. And so there's this pressure that you've got to pursue a degree that's going to make a lot of money, that's going to be stable, and that discourages people from Hispanic populations that come from high poverty rates from going into fields like social work and mental health care. So I definitely agree there's got to be some kind of education there, helping students, young people understand that this is an important field and help them fight for this, and funding for this field too.
Yeah. Thanks, Omar, for that. Someone was saying it's also necessary to get the parents of these children to advocate and participate. So educating our parents and motivating them is paramount. And I agree. I mean, from a parent standpoint, you know, having a 7-year-old with anxiety and sensory processing struggles, it's really tough. I mean, it's really tough. And I'm thinking, you know, excuse me, she's not bad enough for the school to give her free anything. So we pay out of pocket. Our insurance, my husband's a principal, our insurance doesn't cover. So I pay out of pocket for everything. So I've been grateful to find people who are willing to work with me on a sliding scale. I'll just be very honest about that. Because I work at a nonprofit, y'all. So that's the other thing. Sorry, I'm coughing. And then what kind of goes along with this is, what does NAMI do to help educate parents in the community? And we have our free basics course, which is the 6-week parenting course for any parents who are struggling to parent their hard to parent child. I mean, who's living with a mental health condition or not. Kids are hard. They don't come with manuals. No one told me that. And so basics is a really great way to help that. But I think this is really great conversation. And Alice, earlier, I didn't mean to cut you off. I see that you turned your video off, and I'm glad that Melissa, you were able, Dr. Maureen, you were able to share. And great insight from Omar. And Debbie, to everyone, are you all in the school systems? So a couple things. No, Alice, not at all. You, I appreciate your insight. I really do. Alice was saying, sorry to have gotten you off track, but you didn't at all. It did really roll into the conversation. I just want to make sure that we answered that question for the person who asked it. So someone's asking if the basics course is available in South Dallas yet. I don't know. So South Dallas does have, there is a Southern Sector NAMI, and so I'm not sure if they have that available yet. I will say though that NAMI, on NAMI.org, you can do basics on demand, which is like basics on the go, and it is at your own pace. And so you can take that course completely free. And because one of the challenges I found, to be honest with you, as a parent, I couldn't make it to the class because my kiddo needed me. As a sensory kid, she really, I mean, she had a lot going on at that time, so I wasn't able to actually go. So basics on demand has been awesome. A lot of families don't have access to transportation yet. We're doing as much as we can virtually, and I think we're going to keep it because of this. But again, basics on the go virtually, and that really helps families. We also have our family support group online virtually, and we have our peer support group online as well. So yeah, so if anyone has any, and we're kind of coming down to the hour, we have about 3 more minutes. And I want to make sure that I touched upon everything. Does anyone have anything that they want to add? Debbie, I did not understand what you meant by are you all in the school systems? So if you can explain that a bit more. And then can't churches start that program in the community? Are you talking about basics, Ebony? Yeah. So, I mean, really you're going to be working with Jen on anything to do with programming, but yes, we've had a couple of schools and churches who have donated space to be able to have these programs in the, in their space. And it's so important because, we do give a free program. It's a 6-week course. Like I said before, it's two hours once a week for 6 weeks. Talks about brain biology, how to help your kiddo in school, what you can do as a parent, all of those little things that you need to help navigating as you're going into, things like OT in the school system and, how to get those services for your child. And and there are some places, we do have some churches who are able to hold those in their space and open it up to our community. We have a school who does that as well, Vanguard, I believe, but you'd have to ask Jen. So as long as they have trained presenters, remember you have to take a course to be able to get the training, to be able to train. And if you want to be a volunteer, come see me and I will get you started. So final thoughts. I'm going to start with Omar. Any final thoughts that you want to leave behind?
I think just wrapping everything together from my experiences and what we've already talked about, consider that when you're coming across someone for the first time, consider them holistically. Don't come in with any assumptions on who they are. They might be a multicultural person, meaning they're maybe LGBT, but they're also Hispanic. Maybe they were poor growing up. So consider them a blank slate and really get to know them. Don't put your own assumptions on this person and get to know them. The more you know about them and their culture, the more you learn too. So it's great for you too.
Thanks, Omar. Zoe, any final thoughts you want to leave behind?
Yeah, so I really like the discussion we had here today. And so my final thought would be to hope that we all individually and in groups continue this discussion past today with our peers, with our family members, with our community, because as I mentioned before, stigma is one of the greatest barriers to care that's shared amongst nearly all multicultural groups. And so by talking about it, by sharing our experiences with people around us, we can let everyone know that they are not alone, that we are here willing to listen, and as Omar said, willing to learn so that we can be more culturally competent in our actions, and so that we are more aware of how much of an impact we can have on each other, and hopefully get that conversation started on either a legislative level or maybe something a little bit before that, so we can hopefully get the change that we all want to see.
Aryela?
Kind of building off what Omar and Zoe said, I do think it is really important that, everyone is aware of everyone's cultures, whether or not you do understand it or not, just kind of anything you can just kind of like really help end the stigma or decrease it even just a little bit. So.
How about you, Lauren? Any final thoughts?
I would just add, there was a question about educating parents in the community, and I would just add that as just encouraging parents to advocate for their kids, because I think being an Ending the Silence presenter for youth and being at 13 having my first suicide attempt, parents are the barrier. They are the main barrier, and just getting them to a place where they understand that they're not a failure. This is something that everybody, so many people experience, and just encouraging them to get help, to get their children help is so paramount.
Yeah, and I will say, to add on to what Lauren was saying and to add on to the basics, we do have Ending the Silence for Families. That is really what we say is like really the first step. That's like mental health 101 for families to say, you are not at fault, but you can be the person who helped your child. It was not easy for me to walk in to have to call a play therapist at 4 or 5 years old, but I knew what I had to do, and it's not anyone's fault. So I encourage you guys to look into these programs like Ending the Silence for Families and Basics if you're wanting that to help with some of those barriers to access to care. And then also we have things like peer-to-peer, like Lauren spoke about earlier, which helps any peer who's living with a mental health condition. And then of course our family-to-family program as well. I thank y'all so much for the great discussion. Thank y'all so much for those of you who spoke up. And thank you to our panelists and Zoe for all of your hard work. And we just appreciate you guys. And I just want to encourage everyone as we finish out Minority Mental Health Month at the end of this month, July, that we don't let it be this last conversation that we have about minority mental health, and that we continue to go out there and spread information and just spread information about mental health in general. So thank y'all to everyone who joined us, and appreciate y'all.
Thank you.